ho ho! Welcome to month 3 of C for Christmas with the Sewing Works. I'm Corinne. I'm going to be showing you some tips on how you might like to finish up your Christmas quilting on this beautiful wall hanging we've been working on. So a couple things you might need to get ahead of time is some matching threads. You can use your embroidery threads if you want. You'll want to get either a top stitch needle or a quilting needle. I actually prefer a stretch needle. I use them for lots of things, but they help me eliminate skipped stitches. And I'm going to show you how you can do some of these designs with a walking foot if you have one. A number 10 edge foot also works really well for many of them, but my personal favorite will come as a big surprise to you is going to be the number 72 ruler foot. So these designs are quick and simple, and hopefully you can challenge yourself to finish this project on your own. Okay, so I have you over here at my Bernina, and this is my walking foot. Walking feet come with 3 different interchangeable soles. This is the closed toe version that comes on the walking foot, and we're going to work to switch that out for our edge stitch sole, which looks like this and has this flange in the front. If you don't have a walking foot, you may be looking for your number 10 foot. I happen to have the number 10C here. I use this on my littler machine, which is why I don't have the dual feed version here. And I do recommend the walking foot over the dual feed, just because when you're working with a 3-layer quilt, this has a lot better grip than your dual feed. But either will work. So if you have a 10 or a 10D, give it a try. But if you're thinking you might want to add something to your Christmas list, this walking foot is phenomenal for many, many purposes. So let me first show you how to change out the sole. There's a little screw here on the side that's going to loosen. You want to loosen that quite a bit for yourself, and you'll see that that's opening up these jaws. Let me zoom in a little bit. Which is going to allow that little sole to clip off of there. Okay, now the soles have 2 holes on one side and 1 hole on the other side that's going to get married up in there. So we're going to slide in, get that one side secured first that's got the 2 holes so that we know it's in the correct spot. And then we're going to line up that other side. I know it's kind of hard to see on camera, and get that 1 hole on the other side in place as we tighten that down. Now the second trick with the walking foot is going to be to make sure you get this fork on top of your needle bar before you try to wrestle with getting the cone on the back clipped in how you do normally with the foot. So I like to slide this in kind of slightly to the right side and line up that fork so that all I have to do is bring it forward. And I've already engaged that around that needle bar. Then I'm looking back here for the cone to come up, and then my lever, which is back here, to come forward. I know you're at kind of a steep angle to see that. Okay, so let's talk about the first basic design ideas. I'm going to zoom you out a little bit here. So I think the best way to get started on this project, and most projects really, is to start with some stabilization by stitching in the ditch. So we want to stitch in the ditch or on the edge of your seam on the outside of this sashing and on the inside for the red work. And then when we get to the lettering, we're going to go just right in the ditch on the edge of the block. Then later we're going to come back and show you how to do this pretty Argyle look in the sashing. So lots of straight line quilting. You'll also want to go ahead and ditch your borders to get those secured. You'll need a red or a green to blend in with whatever color you're going on. I like to blend colors a lot. It's pretty forgiving and just adds that little extra touch of texture instead of a lot of color. So I've got a blending cream thread on right now, and I'm going to whip this quilt around to show you some of the blocks I haven't quilted already, and we'll get started. Okay, so whenever we quilt, we always want to make sure that we have a long enough bobbin tail. So I actually pulled out some bobbin thread on the bottom and didn't use the thread cutter built into my bobbin area so that I can bring my bobbin thread to the top as I get going here. So I'm going to lower my presser foot, send my needle down, with a heel kick and back up, which is basically forming one stitch. I'm going to lift up my presser foot and pull on that bobbin thread to get it to come to the top. So I'm going to secure both threads in one hand, bringing my presser foot right back over where I started, and I'm using this flange to guide me right down this stitch. Now you're not sitting quite square in front of my foot. Let me see if I can help you out a little bit. I also have to sit here, so we have to share a seat kind of. And I'm going to use that to just guide me right down. I forgot to bring my stitch length up. I like to quilt at about a stitch length of 3. Oh, and my machine wants to know what presser foot I have on, of course. Okay, here we go. So I'm using that flange and the feed dogs to help me advance that along. You may be noticing how that double action feeding works. The metal part of the presser foot comes down, and then the black part comes over the top and then comes down. So that's how it's kind of walking its way across the fabric. I don't really have to give it any push. I'm just kind of helping it keep the fabric flat. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize there was a bubble in your way, until I get to that corner. Now you'll see this is why I tend to go towards the ruler foot, because now that I've hit the corner, I have to turn my entire project. So I have hover on my machine, so the presser foot did come up a little bit. Oops. We're gonna have mess with the camera angle every time too because of all this quilt I'm shuffling around. Okay, I'm turned. Gonna go right down the next side. Whenever you're quilting, I'm gonna back you out a little bit, it's important to keep this fabric all elevated and kind of fluffed. That'll help the feeding ability of your machine. If it's having to pull something up over the edge of your table, it's gonna end up not having enough force and kind of stalling out. And you'll end up with some teeny tiny little stitches. Okay, hit that next corner, hang on as we spin again. Ooh. Oops, we're kind of hung up there. Okay, there we go. Spun around. Sometimes if I get close to the corner, I know it's hard to see through this big bulky foot, but I'm not quite where I want to be. Is like I need a half a stitch more. I'll sometimes use that heel kick to then advance the fabric right where I want it to be, and then put my needle down right in the corner before I spin. And as you can see, I'm on the home stretch now, coming right back in to where I was. When I finish a quilting design, I typically will do that up and down 2 or 3 times just to lock off those threads before I pull up my bobbin. So to end this stitch, I'm going to go needle up with a heel kick, presser foot up with my button or my knee lever if I didn't have a camera sitting between my legs. I'm going to swipe my finger underneath my foot to grab a loop of that top thread, then send my needle down one more time to grab up my bobbin loop one more time. And as I pull this fabric towards me, I can use that loop and the thread coming out of the needle to work that bobbin to the top. Now since I took those locking stitches at the end, I'm going to go ahead and just snip this off clean. All 4 of those little threads. Okay? Now I'm going to switch to the ruler foot and show you how much more I enjoy that. Whether you choose to stick with this method all the way through, that's up to you. But I challenge you to try new things, and I'd be happy to help you work on your technique with your ruler if you like. All right, welcome back. Now I have my Bernina number 72 ruler foot on, and you'll see this foot has a nice high profile for me to use my rulers against. And it's going to allow me to go in any direction without having to spin my fabric. I'm also going to be using my favorite straight ruler, which happens to be the HQ skinny ruler. And I love this ruler because it fits real nice in my hand. It's nice and thin, and it's got lots of angles on it if I should want. So, and it's nice and long to go across the span of a block. Since I have my 72 foot on, I'm going to tell my machine that, and so it'll take my feed dogs down. Some of you may have to manually put the feed dogs down. So this particular quilt block I've already ditched around the outside of the frame, and now I'm going to go around the inside of the frame. Once again, I'll show you that technique for getting started. We're going to set the foot down, send the needle down once and back up, bring up the foot control so I can get a hold of that bobbin. Now this is a lot less bulky, so hopefully easier for you to see. I'm going to set the presser foot back down and take a few little locking stitches for those tails. And with the Bernina ruler foot, I am going to actually take my hover off because it drives me a little crazy when I'm starting and stopping, and it goes up and down. So remember to do that. You'll go to settings, sewing settings, hand with the buttons, and then it's under the needle down feature. I'm going to go for no hover. That will also help me to set this presser foot height. This is adjustable with this dial on the side, and most of the time you're going to want that pretty far down unless you're using a high loft bat. You want the fabric to just barely glide underneath of it, so it'll eliminate any extra flagging that might happen. Okay, so I'm going to line that ruler up. And my ruler, of course, has handy grip. I don't know if you saw that. That's the grip that holds the fabric. It makes it easier for me to advance the fabric through. So I'm going to sew straight towards us first. Just trying to keep that nice, even stitching. Oh, and if I was really thinking ahead, I would have put on my stitch regulator table, which I love. The new inserts and tables from Sew Steady allow you to put your stitch regulator underneath so that your stitching stays even the entire time while you're rulering. Kind of a new little feature. And now I'm going to go across the bottom. Now always you want to err on the side of the thread matching the background that it lands in. So in this case, I want to be just slightly into the cream. Okay, and now we're going to go up. It doesn't matter to me which side the ruler is on the foot. I'm just kind of lining it up, eyeballing it for straight. And when you're doing stitch in the ditch, you almost kind of have a fluid relationship between the pressure of the foot and the ruler. So if you need to make a micro adjustment over to the right or to the left, you can do that. Let me bring you a little closer to center here. So anytime when you're sewing away from yourself, you want to make sure to keep that needle running at a fairly decent speed. Otherwise you can cause what they call needle deflection, and you might be pulling the needle away from the hook as it goes down, which will make it not be able to form a stitch. I found that using the stretch needle often helps with that. And one more side here. So I match the speed of the machine with the speed that I'm quilting at. And as I get closer to the corners, I tend to slow down. Okay, made it back to the corner. So I'm going to take several little stitches to lock that in. Needle up, foot up, grab that thread with a loop, send the needle down one more time, bring it up, bring the foot up, and now I'm going to finesse that bobbin to the top. So I should have 2 bobbin tails and 2 top tails, and the bobbin tail is actually still a loop, so you'll see 3 golds and 2 creams, and I'm going to snip them all off clean. Okay, so I'm going to continue ditching these last couple blocks, and then we're going to show you how to do the Argyle pattern. I'm really excited to show you this. I did switch over to my other insert. So this table has the ability to have my stitch regulator underneath while I have my ruler foot on top. So I'm going to get perfectly even stitches now. Hooray! Okay, now let's talk about how to do this fun Argyle pattern. So you can see I've already done some, and basically you don't have to mark this ahead of time, but if it makes you feel better to have a target to aim for, you can mark these little junctures where it's kind of the halfway point in the blocks. You're gonna end up taking your ruler, and it's 3/4 of an inch, then 1 1/2, and so on and so forth. So they're 3/4 of an inch apart. And you'll see I used a blue water soluble marker to mark a couple of those little dots to aim for. You might feel more comfortable with that. It's not necessary. Some people are fine with just being able to eyeball that center. So let's talk about how to travel. On my horizontal little chunks, which means, well, you know, horizontal versus vertical on the quilt. I am doing this section by section. So the vertical ones I'm able to go the whole length of the quilt, but the horizontal ones I'm just doing this 1, 2, 3, 4 hourglass blocks. If you don't have hourglass blocks, you may want to go ahead and mark if you want this same quilting pattern. It should be the same size sashing, which is basically 1 1/4 finished by 6. Yeah, 6. And so, oh, actually it's 1 1/2 by 6. 1 1/2-ish, right? Those hourglass blocks were so fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the middle of the block on the end, and if you again want to mark here, you can. And I've switched to a pretty gold thread now, so I'm going to bring that bobbin thread to the top, take several little locking stitches, and I'm going to aim for that center point right across. And I know this isn't exactly a spacing gauge, but for you people who have 8 series people or anyone who's bought this multi-purpose tool, this little gizmo that opens your front cover also is 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just confirming that I'm going to hit that right where I want to. Okay, now I'm aiming for this one over here. So I'm lining up my ruler, got to be 1/4 of an inch away, and I'm going to go all the way across. My table's hanging up here. Let me see if I can get a little bit better grip on it. There we go. And again, we're going to bounce back up to the top. Now, if you had your walking foot on, you would probably definitely want some kind of visual to be aiming for. Okay, oop, sorry, couldn't see through my fat fingers. and then back down onto the next one. 1/4 of an inch away from my target. And stopping at the seam. Now I'm going to come up to that halfway point on this end. I'm going to zoom you out a little bit, and then I'm going to travel back the opposite direction so that I can do each one of these in one swoop. Try to put my ruler in the back so maybe you can see a hair bit better what I'm trying to accomplish. And back down to the other side. Halfway point right there. Oop, well, maybe slipped a little bit. That's okay. In the big scheme of things, you're not going to see it. And down again. So you can do each one of these little halfway, little 6-inch chunks of sashing without breaking your threads. Okay, voila! Now I'm going to do this next one. So it's the same concept when you are doing these little 6-inch segments as it would be to go down the entire side. However, when I go down the side, I'm going to have the ability to probably start here and go the entire length of this quilt, bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then coming back on the other axis. But for the horizontals, I'm doing them one 6-inch chunk at a time. And look how cool it turns out. Okay, I'm working my way around this outer border, and I want to show you a little trick I discovered with my ruler so that I don't have to use my spacing gauge all the time. And also then I want to talk to you about what we might suggest for you to do in the border. So I'm finding that instead of needing to use my spacing gauge to get me lined up on my next point, which is behind my needle from where you're at, I can use these grid lines on my ruler to line up that 1/4 of an inch to help me just nail that. And when I get to that seam, I stop. Then I have a 1/4 inch on this side, which is hitting that seam. And nailed it again. So it's not taking me near as long to go down my blocks when I don't have to check my spacing gauge every time. Okay? So that's the cool little trick, and I still have to come back over these. We decided to use a Kimberbell embroidery design to finish off our border, and we use this fun star pattern. We'll be happy to explain to you how to figure out how much pattern and how big of a gap to put in between your patterns. But they have a lot of really fun designs if you want to try something a little more advanced and get your embroidery machine back out. You'll just want to make sure that you have plenty of batting and backing to be able to hoop this area close to the edge of your project. Also, a mega hoop, the long skinny hoop, is really nice for getting into these narrow long spaces. So if you don't have very much extra, you might need to go to a smaller, narrower hoop to be able to hoop this properly. And we can't wait to see what you guys start creating. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you loved your See for Christmas project, and I can't wait to see how they turn out. Bye-bye.